Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second in our wellbeing series, Looking Beyond Physical Diagnosis. You're joining us for the second session. We had the first session last week, and I've got a few pieces of housekeeping to run through. Just to remind you all that it is being recorded, so even though your videos are not on, that you are being recorded. And that the session is obviously going to be played back on our website. I can, see that we had a great response to our first video. The session itself is educational. It's not medical advice or an intervention of any kind. We just wanted to make that clear. And as I said, the cameras are off for everyone else because Linda, Claire, and I want to make this a three-way conversation. And at the last piece of kind of general housekeeping is that we definitely want to invite and engage your questions at towards the end of the session. We've had some great feedback from last week's session, and we have some questions that we're going to be asking at the end of the session from there as well. So thank you all for the feedback. It's ongoing every week. It'll be on the same page. We're really excited to see that the first session had a great deal of impact, and we're very grateful for it, and we thank you for joining us. So just to recap, this series, Looking Beyond Physical Diagnosis, is a three-part wellbeing series for families dealing with the emotional challenges that can accompany diagnosis or disability. We will be exploring the premise that when facing illness or disability, despite any changes in lifestyle or circumstances, our well-being is fully available. Last week, we discussed beyond grief, loss, and fear, how it's a phase that we pass through rather than it's something that's fixed. It actually comes and goes. And we pointed to the fact that there is possibility and hope for everyone to see that and find it for ourselves. And we spoke from our own personal experience along the way. So if you haven't seen the video, please do visit the page that's been sent out in the emails. So this week we're going to be talking about, I'm looking in my notes, living from possibility, exploring how we can actually access a lightness, so to speak, more hope and possibility, going into how it happens, and talking about how the human psychological experience works. So I'm going to hand over now to Linda, who's going to start the ball rolling. So Linda, please take it away.
Thank you, Julian. Last time I talked about the power of hope in terms of rehabbing my husband who had a stroke after heart surgery, and the power of hope for me as a caregiver, because I found it very nourishing to be hopeful. And I've also found it, I could think more clearly about things when I was hopeful. And also bringing the hope, the feeling of the hope to my husband really stabilized him in times when he was dark. So there was a tremendous power in the feeling of hope in our recovery, not just his recovery, but my recovery from anxiety. But there was a fabulous question that was asked that I didn't really feel like I answered well at all. And the question was, well, it's wonderful that you were able to find hope. Well, how would other people do that? How would you talk about people finding hope for themselves? And I actually thought about that all week. That was like my homework, and I really considered it. And I went back to my journey, and so I thought I'd go back, take you back there with me in how it happened, and also how I think it's possible for you to find it as well. So for those who were here last week, I mentioned that when I found out my husband had a stroke, my immediate concern was that he would recognize me. And I thought, I'll be good if he can recognize me. And he was able to recognize me. So I felt like, thank you for that he recognizes me. But he couldn't do a lot more than that. And at that point, and I fell into the most intense anxiety and fear and stayed there pretty much. I mean, I would go out of it a bit from time to time, but mostly I lived in panic attacks. And at one point I thought, it's going to be a long haul, this stroke recovery. It's going to be a long haul for you and a long haul for George. And you need a better feeling, Linda. You can't, you're not going to be able to do much from this feeling. It's going to wear you out and not support him. So I felt very up against it. And I saw very clearly that the anxiety, the intense anxiety I was in was not going to help. And I needed something else. And when I had that, it was almost like a crossroads moment in my mind of, this isn't going to work. I need something else. It was so clear. And then up popped hope, and I grabbed it. I grabbed the feeling of it and I stayed there. Now, one of the things I knew from my work with people is that people can change their state of mind, or their state of mind will change. And we'll be talking about state of mind and what creates state of mind, but basically it's your thought and feeling. Your thought and feeling create your state of mind, or your experience, your thought and feeling. And I knew that from my work with people. So in a way, I just applied it to myself. I need my state of mind to change. I need something else because I can't do it from here. And then up popped hope. Now, here's the thing. If you all look back in your life, into your memory, you would find times, you'd find examples of that. I know that. You'd look back and go, yeah, I was in a really bad frame of mind, and then somebody said something to me and I changed. I changed my feeling, my attitude, everything kind of changed. Something happened and I switched, my mind changed. So as I'm talking, reflect on that, reflect on your history of times when you were maybe surprised by the fact that you came out of something that was maybe very intense or very dark or very fearful, and your mind switched. Let me give you an example, simple example. When I was 12, I wanted to be friends with this girl, and she didn't want to be friends with me. And it shocked me. It kind of pulled the rug out from under me, and I got really dark about it and sullen and mopey about the fact that this girl didn't want to be my friend, because I was like, I want to be your friend. How come you don't want to be my friend? And I remember my mom saying to me, what's going on with you? Why are you so down? Why are you so sullen? Because normally I was pretty exuberant. And I said, well, this girl that I really want to have a friendship with, she doesn't like me. She doesn't want to be my friend. And my mom said, well, yeah, but you don't have to be this way about it. You don't have to feel the way you feel. And somehow that affected me. I kind of woke up. Actually, not kind of woke up. I did have the experience of waking up out of it. And all of a sudden I brightened up and woke up and kind of shook it off. And it was like, yeah, I don't have to feel bad about it. I don't have to feel this way about it. So I went back to my exuberant self, but the circumstances hadn't changed. She still didn't want to be my friend. So it was not, so the outside world didn't change. My inside world changed. Let me give you one other example of this. Like, you know how little kids, like when they're like 5, 6, 7, 8, and they can get really upset about something, really emotional and angry, and kind of throw a little bit of a tantrum. And then you say to them something like, "Oh, we're having fish sticks for dinner and French fries or chips." And all of a sudden they snap out of it and they go, "Ooh, fish sticks." It's the same phenomena. They changed their minds changed, their state of mind changed from being really upset to not being upset, because they're thinking about something else, thinking about the fish sticks, not thinking about whatever that was upsetting to them, that they didn't get their own way in some way or something. But and it's the same thing with my friend when I was 12. It's like it's not like I thought about something else in that situation. It's like I woke up to the fact that I was dark and down and sullen and didn't have to be, even though the circumstances didn't change. So that's one of the things that we want to talk about, is the fact that minds change and how that happens. And when you kind of understand the phenomena, which is happening to you all the time probably, and you don't notice, minds changing, thought and feeling changing. When you start to get on to that human quality, for some reason, you start to look for possibility, other possible states of mind than the one you have when you get stuck. When you get stuck in thought and feeling or a certain state of mind, and you understand the phenomena of minds changing, state of mind changing, you can get to start looking past the state you're in to possible states of mind that are different or more helpful. And that's what I did when I realized I couldn't live from that anxiety and do what I needed to do. I couldn't function well, and I needed a new state of mind. I was looking past where I was and hoping for something else. I was looking for possibility. So what we want to start with is thought and feeling, and how that works for people to create their experience of life.
I love what you were saying, Linda, about the possibility of having a different feeling in the same circumstances. And for me, that's so hopeful. And last week I spoke about how, with a fresh thought, because it always comes, how does your feeling change? Well, your feeling changes with a fresh thought. So in the example that Linda just gave with kids, you can see it so clearly with kids. You know, they can be all wrapped up in something, and then you kind of can distract them so easily, and then they're like, oh, and their whole state changes. Just like Linda's saying, they can go from one state to another. They're really, really fluid. They're not kind of as attached to their thinking as we are. But as adults, the older we get, it seems the more seriously we take our thinking, the more attached we get to it, the more we think it's really important. And some people think that they are their thinking. Like, so for example, people might say, well, I'm just, you know, I'm an anxious person. And they might have a lot of anxious thinking, and then they might then translate that into them being an anxious person. But actually, how the system works is that we are not our thinking. We are thinkers, that's true, and our experience is brought to life moment to moment by our thinking. But our thinking is not us. And so what happens is thought and consciousness or awareness combine together to create your experience. And the experience happens from the inside out. It's an internal thing. Last week I said, that we are projectors, we're not cameras. So we're constantly projecting our thinking onto the world, and then that creates our experience. And because thought itself is kind of invisible and it's not solid, it's formless, and it's transitory, the way we get an experience of our thinking is that we feel every thought we have through our sensory system. And essentially our sensory system is like the very best special effects department in the world. So you have a thought and it's brought to life in your body, and there's no filter. So it doesn't matter what type of thought you have, you will feel it. And people don't realize that their feelings are coming from their thinking. Most of the time, people think that the world is coming at them, that their experience is outside in. So given a certain set of circumstances, I have no choice but to think this way. Of course, I would think this way. But actually, if you think about experience, there's a whole range of different options available to us at any one time. So as it happens at the moment, I have somebody staying with me who recently had an accident and is quite badly hurt. They will be better, they will get over it. But it's really interesting for me because it's all very new for him. So I'm observing it. And his state of mind is so buoyant. He's so positive. He's like, oh, I'll be better soon. Look, I can already wiggle my fingers. I can already lift my leg up. He's living in a place of possibility. He's not going, oh no, it's so awful. I had an accident, and dwelling in that feeling. And that's his kind of natural state. I was talking to him about it earlier. It's very interesting. And it doesn't even occur to him to have the negative thoughts. He's just a very kind of buoyant person. And so because of that thinking, that's the experience that he's living in.
We know
you're going to say something.
One thing that's always impressed me about you ever since I've met you is that I had the thought about you. She doesn't think of herself as disabled. She doesn't take on disabled thinking. She doesn't identify with being disabled.
I want to make the distinction. I want to make the distinction because I know I'm disabled. So it's not like I'm kind of denying it.
No, I know you know you're disabled, but you don't identify with it. I think that's what I'm trying to say. In other words, one of the most, you know how people can get, they think all they do is think about themselves as a disabled person. And it pushes them more into the disability, where you think you think so little about your disability, or at least that's the way it looks, that your disability starts to become invisible to me, to an outside person.
I think that's a really fascinating phenomenon that you're pointing to, because people do often say that they forget after they've met me for a while, they just completely forget. And I do not, you're absolutely right. I don't think about it at all until I stand up or walk or navigate, something like that. And it's just not part of my persona in a way, or as you're saying, it's not part of the way in which I think about myself. So it's not what I project onto the world. And so that's so interesting, because then people experience me differently because of that. I don't know how to explain that, but it's fascinating. Julian, is there something, you look like there's something you want to say?
Before Julian, I want to just say one more. I think it's because you don't identify with your disability. You know you're disabled, but you don't identify it. In other words, it's not you. It's not you.
Yeah, it's totally not me. It's part of me, but it's not the totality of me.
Okay, I'm sorry, Julian, go ahead.
It's okay. I was going to kind of rain on the party a little bit by kind of talking, and not really, but kind of talking again, because I can imagine, because this is how I felt when my daughter was injured, right? So when she was injured, I said last week, like it felt like a disaster. Like there's no question, it felt horrible, and the future looked bleak. And kind of going back to the theme of what we're talking about today, that there was no possibility, and it looked very fixed, meaning the situation defined the feeling, right? That the feeling I was living in was bleak, and that was directly as a result of the circumstances that had just happened. Um, and it didn't look to me that what we're talking about was a possibility then. Now, kind of, I just wanted to kind of flesh out a little bit about what Claire was saying. Now, um, the, the feeling I was living in was, I can say now, looking back, almost kind of outside of the situation. I can see that that was coming from how I was thinking about it, but it didn't look or appear that that was the case. It looked like there was a kind of 1 + 1 = 2 kind of math around. Well, this has happened, so and this is the future, and so therefore this is the feeling that I'm living in. Now, I can imagine that there are a lot of people kind of, well, not imagine, I know that there are a lot of people living in that, because a lot of people have kind of reached out to me and kind of expressed that to me. And I kind of wanted to say that what Claire is, kind of just elaborate a little with my own story, in terms of just kind of sort of say, well, what I came to see very briefly, which was helpful, was that that feeling was coming from inside of me, that I didn't have to feel that feeling because of what I was thinking. And what I was thinking about was this future that didn't exist, that all it existed right now was this beautiful baby, who looked exactly the same in relative terms as any other baby, as our other children, and was absolutely fine and healthy and fit and well, and there was no problem other than how I was perceiving and thinking about the future. Now, I didn't see it initially, but I very quickly, within a few weeks, saw that I didn't have to think about that. That there was a way in which I could just catch myself, so to speak, thinking about that, and just let it go, move on, or think about something else or whatever. I didn't have to think about that. And so my feeling changed very quickly, like how I was feeling as a result of that, because as Claire said, that thought is, transitory and just moves. So as soon as I stopped thinking about the disaster, quote unquote, that feeling passed instantly, and I started feeling better about it. And with that feeling better about it, new thought came in, which wasn't like kind of, okay, how was my favorite football team, or, with the rest of the family. I mean, those things would happen as well. But I also started to see that all the thinking about the disaster was also kind of just the thinking that I was holding on to in that moment. Mm-hmm. And very soon, like what I spoke about last week, that I felt that I was being punished. Well, actually, that looked made up and just some thought that I was thinking about. And like very quickly, the feeling and thinking around the whole experience started to change, and it started to appear, not just appear more hopeful, but it was more hopeful, and there was more, possibility, and life became enjoyable, and very quickly, not over time. This wasn't something I'd worked on or developed, but over time, through just seeing the psychological experience that was being created for me, the feelings changed. And the situation effectively changed, even though it didn't, even though nothing did change. The feeling around it changed, and it looked very different and felt very different. Sorry.
You know what I heard you say that was so beautiful to me, Julian, and so reinforcing, is that it's just thought that brings you down. It's just thought that lowers your spirits. It's just thought that makes it look hopeless. It's just thought. It's just thought. And it's so simple and so profound. And if you look into your own experience, you'll see if you could do a test. You can look and see if what we're saying is true. Look at your own thinking and see how it brings you up and it brings you down.
It fluctuates throughout the day. Everybody's thinking is always fluctuating throughout the day, depending on what's going on. And what I find really hopeful is that you're literally just one new thought or one different thought away from having a completely different experience. So last week I talked about when I was 11 having that insight, which is essentially a fancy word for new thought. But I had a new thought that actually I had a choice as to how I would respond to my situation. And because we're thinking beings, because we are thinkers, we're always having new thought. Always. There's always, you don't run out of your capacity to think. There's always fresh and new thinking available to you at any time. But sometimes people get stuck because they get in a kind of fixed way of seeing things, and then they think, gosh, they kind of think it's impossible for there to be anything else other than their particular thinking about it. But
you know what?
Yeah, sorry, Linda. Go ahead.
Well, you know what really helps me around it is when I start thinking in a certain way that gives me, starts to take me out of the feeling of hope. When I start thinking in a certain way, what really helped, and this is just me, it's like I think, is this reality or is it just this thought? Is it thought or reality? In other words, if I'm start to feel hopeless or down or upset or frustrated or impatient or I don't want to do this anymore, or, I don't like this, or I don't want this. I'm like, is this reality or is this just thought? And that hugely helps me because it brings me back to my understanding of the inside out nature of experience, that thoughts creates our personal reality. And like Claire said, it feels real because our thinking is run through our consciousness, which is connected to our body. So we feel it in our body and it feels real. So we think of it as reality. But you turn it around, you go, no, thinking creates my reality. And it feels really strong. So sometimes I have really strong feelings like, oh no, is this it? Is this my life? And I'm like, wait a minute. You're just feeling that because you're thinking that. It's just thought, it's not reality. The thinking leaves, and then I have this really nice feeling. In other words, when people aren't thinking, when people step out of so-called reality, their mind's quiet, they go into a neutral mind, which is a beautiful mind. A neutral mind is a beautiful feeling. So when I can go from this, like the kid with the fish stick, I can go from this, I don't want to do this anymore, to fish sticks feeling, the fish sticks feeling. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and what if our feeling states are actually a barometer for how clear our thinking is, not telling us about the outside world, but that's all they are. Like when someone first suggested that to me, that my feelings were a barometer for the clarity of my thinking, I was like, like, so anything that we're suggesting, you have to go check it out in your own world and see if it makes sense to you. But I suddenly began to realize, and when I saw that was true, it was profoundly helpful to me, because before I realized that, I spent a lot of my life in nothing to do with my disability. Like that wasn't an issue for me, ironically, but there were other things that I was super sensitive about. Okay, nothing to do, and Linda knows all about this, but that I was super sensitive about, and those things I would get triggered all the time. And so when I got triggered, I would spend my life in a very uncomfortable feeling. And it was almost like it was like a kind of the key that opened the lock to my freedom from that cycle, when I realized, gosh, my feelings are not data about the outside world that I have to take notice of and take action on. They're actually just telling me about my state of mind and how seriously I should be taking my thinking at the moment, in the moment. And when I saw that, if I got upset, I kind of allowed myself to kind of settle down a bit, because seeing that kind of gives you room to kind of go, okay, wait a minute. And then you kind of settle down. And as you settle down, more options open up to you. It's an expansive place.
Mm-hmm. You know, we've been getting questions about guilt. Should we talk about
yeah.
questions?
Yeah, can I just say one thing before we start talking about questions? So I just wanted to remind people as well, like, this is a very brief 3-part series into something that is, you know, we can talk about in a lot more detail. There's a lot more to it than you know, the kind of 45 minutes or so that we give in each week's session for this. So, and as Claire and Linda both said, like, we're just asking you to kind of look at your own experience of things and check it out and see if it's of interest, really, and if it makes sense to you. Like, you'll see there's no kind of you know, techniques here that we're kind of pointing to. We're just saying, look at your own feelings and experience and just kind of tell us what you think, really. And so please do use the chat and ask questions, think about your own experience, and let us know. Like, so some of those questions that we've had refer to guilt. And so Linda, yeah, sorry, I just wanted to kind of point out the chat.
Well, do you want to start, Julian?
Yeah, I mean, this was one of the questions, so maybe I'll just read this and then you can answer this and your own experience about guilt as well. So the first question was, what would you say to someone who feels guilty about being hopeful or seeing light at the end of the tunnel when the grief they're going through is due to the loss and bereavement of a loved one? So, you know, they're feeling hopeful, but they're feeling guilt about feeling hopeful because they've lost someone.
Well, let me answer it this way and see if I've got it right. I may have not heard it right, but I remember when my mom died, and I really grieved my mom's death. I really, really loved my mom, and she lived next door to me, and we were friends. And as I started to live again and started to have feelings, positive feelings, I started to feel guilty, because as I would start to live again and have positive feelings, I started giving up the grief. And as I gave up the grief, I stopped thinking about her. And the guilt was letting her go, stop thinking about her in my mind. And it was puzzling. I had never had that happen to me before, where I was feeling guilty over giving up grief, because I was giving, in my mind, I was giving her up. And I realized that, and here's how my self-talk about it, which I do a lot. I do a lot of self-talk, which was, okay, you can hold on to grief and think about your mom, or you can start living in a feeling that doesn't include her death and the fact that you're not going to physically see her. So you can start living your life, like living in the now. And in a way, forgetting about your mom because you're going to be giving up grief. Or you can stay with the grief and not feel guilty and not forget her. And it just, in my mind, in my own common sense, it just was, I've got to live in a fresh and positive way. I have to go there. I have to. And so it just seemed like the obvious choice, but I did make that choice, and I did really look at it, and I saw the guilt of that. But the thing is, I've never been one to feel like guilt rules me. Like I feel like there's a place for guilt. Like guilt taps you on the shoulder and asks you, did you do something morally wrong? See, that's how I see guilt, is something that taps you on the shoulder and asks you to look at whether you did something morally wrong or not. Because people have guilt for things that they shouldn't have guilt for. I mean,
can I say something about guilt? That's occurring to me as you're speaking. Is that okay? For me, when I feel guilty about something, it stops me having an experience of that thing in the here and now. Because guilt is normally for me something about the past. So like when my dad died, he died like a very, very long time ago. Last week I spoke about my biological father, but then I had a stepfather after that. And when he died, I felt guilty for a long time about certain things I had chosen not to do while he was alive. And that guilt stopped me remembering all the beauty of him and the beauty of our relationship. And it kept me in the past. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I think that beyond guilt, there's a kind of freshness, a newness, a possibility to experience the beauty rather than being weighed down by loss and what if and I should have and all those kind of feelings.
You know, I never thought about it that way before, but yeah, guilt can keep you in the past.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that my dad would have wanted me to be guilty. I think he would have wanted me to live my life and have a nice life. I don't think guilt serves anyone. I don't think it serves the person who's feeling it. And I definitely wasn't the case for me that when I stopped feeling guilty, I forgot about my dad. The opposite happened. It was like every time I thought about my dad after I stopped feeling guilty, I felt joy and happiness and love and gratefulness for having had him in my life, rather than thinking, oh no, I wish I'd blah, blah, blah.
I mean, yeah, I was thinking about answering this week, you know, when that comment came through, and I saw, you know, when my father-in-law died, my wife and her mother had very different experiences of it. And I think it's important to point out that grief is a very unique experience for an individual. There's no right or wrong way to
absolutely
experience it. And, you know, you shouldn't, you know, well, I don't want to say you shouldn't, but again, guilt, you know, isn't something I think that Claire and Linda both said that's, you know, is helpful. And if you're feeling hopeful and positive, it's not, as Claire just said, you know, something disrespectful to a loved one, or you know, it's something, you know, positive and you know, to be looked towards, as we pointed out last week and this week.
Yeah. Julian, there was another great question you were going to answer.
Well, wasn't there another question on chat about guilt that came over? Huh?
Just seeing there's one question. There's someone, I don't see all the chat. So if you're seeing questions in the chat, please read them out. But,
yeah, that was to you, Linda, because I don't see that chat.
So if you can see that question, please read it.
But we can't, Julian and I can't see that, so.
Uh-oh. Yeah, I can't find it. It must have been to me, but I can't, but I only saw a bit of it about something about
guilt. Here we go. So I think they've sent it to me now, because there's another question. Yeah. So it says, I feel guilty for wanting to do things my partner can't do because of their disability. And then I feel frustrated because I don't feel free to do what I am able to do. And I give myself a really hard time about this. Thank you. This is incredible. And I think that speaks, Linda, to what you were going to talk about with guilt as well.
Yeah, Linda.
Well, you know, it's so funny because we're so different about it. You know, our guilt comes, we're so guilty about so many different variations on the same theme. Because like, I don't feel like guilty about doing things without my partner. You know, that actually going places without him. I don't feel guilty about that. You know, the activity of being there. I feel guilty about not being with him, not staying with him. See, it's different. Like once I'm gone and out there doing it, I feel fine. I just go through this guilt about leaving him.
Do you want to
But
talk
the-
about that a bit? Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. It's like, you know, how I said that to me, guilt is just something it says, hey, look at this and see if you agree. See if you are doing something against your values or morals or ethics. Look. So when I feel guilty and I look, a lot of what I feel guilty for, I think it's ridiculous that I feel guilty for leaving him. I think it's ridiculous, but I do. So I think this is ridiculous. And then I just get over it. In other words, I don't treadmill it. People treadmill thoughts. They treadmill guilt, you know? And I don't do that because I don't respect what I would call false guilt. I would say that's false guilt and I don't respect it. I mean, I don't think that I have to feel guilty if I'm not with him 100% of the time. It's just, I do, but I don't think I don't respect it.
Can I just say something as well that occurred to me? So in the other side of that question that whoever just asked that is that I feel guilty that sometimes my husband and my daughter can't do everything they want to do because of my disability.
Oh,
I mean, this is just like, can you see what but if we go up a level, I'd love to go up a level and talk about the universality of what we do to ourselves with our thinking. So essentially, we're just talking about the ways in which we're all beating ourselves up with our creative power of thought. And it feels horrible and it's not helpful. And so what do I do when that thought, because it's a thought, right? So when that thought occurs to me, I ask them, I say to them, look, I'm feeling, it's hard, it's hard. Please go out and do your stuff. Please. I don't want to be limiting you. So I have a conversation. I find that conversations really help. Because sometimes we get so stuck in our heads, in our thinking, and we assume that what we're thinking about is the reality that everyone shares. But actually, everyone, as this conversation is showing so beautiful, lives in their own thought-created reality.
yeah. And George is like you. He feels guilty that I don't go out.
Right. So yeah.
And then George feels guilty that he doesn't do enough to help me around the house. He feels guilty about that. And I'll say to him, look, honest to goodness, you don't have to do anything except don't fall. I feel like you don't have to do a thing, just don't fall. And I'd be totally thrilled with you and happy about whatever else you do.
Yeah.
But see, he doesn't, that doesn't do anything for him because he wants
because
to
he's caught up in his guilt. He's running that movie in his head. He's running
But the thing is, what we all have here, like between the three of us and George and I, and then maybe some of you that are listening, is we have an understanding that we don't take that seriously.
Yeah.
We don't take that I don't take guilty thinking seriously. I mean, I have it, but I don't take it seriously. George doesn't hopefully he doesn't take it serious. I tell him not to. I don't know if I ultimately he doesn't either. I have to say that ultimately he doesn't.
There are times when I do take it seriously, but then I remember what it is and how it works, and that's really helpful. And I just want to pick up on Julian's point before. The three of us are kind of touching on the edges around something that people take a study for a very long time, and so we're not expecting you to get what we're saying. But if there's something that you hear in what we say that kind of sparks an interest in you, that's all it takes. It just takes a kind of it's like following breadcrumbs almost.
Well, I want to go back to what Julian said about waking up to thought. It's really that simple. When you wake up to what your state of mind when you wake up to thought and feeling. Just waking up to it clears it, clears your mind. Waking
When
up.
you understand it, when you understand how the system works, I think it clears your mind. Or are you just saying understand, knowing about it?
Well, but people, if you look back into your experience in life, there are times that I think people can relate to what I'm saying as they've woken up.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'd agree with that.
And that's what's happening. They're waking up to thought, they're waking up to experience, and then their minds change. It's really that simple. And I think it happens, and people just, they don't think about it. They don't appreciate that.
Yeah.
They don't appreciate it. Yeah.
So we're kind of pointing to a system that's already in play. We're kind of illuminating it and describing it and saying, this is how it seems that experience works. This is how experience works. And we're kind of shining a spotlight. So this is nothing new. We're not saying anything that you won't have already experienced in your life in some way. You just might not have thought of it in this way.
But as you start to appreciate it, as you start to kind of go, oh, that's what I did. I woke up and that's what cleared my head. You lean into the system. You start looking to do it.
Yeah.
You start, you know how when you decide to paint your house, and so when you're driving in your car, you see house colors where you didn't notice house colors before. You didn't notice, you maybe didn't even notice houses before. But when you decide to paint your house, you notice house colors. Well, when you start to get into this understanding, this conversation of waking up to thought, such that your mind switches, you start looking for that, and you start seeing it all over the place, and then you start feeling it, and you start feeling that you're in a thought feeling that you may not want to be in, and you wake up. So as you start leaning into the system, or another way of saying it is you start seeing house colors become part of your awareness.
Or cars, if you're looking to buy a red car, suddenly you see red cars everywhere.
All over the place,
Okay.
yeah. So are reminding you that you do this anyway,
Yeah.
but you don't take advantage of it. Take advantage of it, because you can take advantage of it, because a lot of times people think that they need to think about things. They need to think about their grief, or they need to think about their sadness, or they need to think into their experience, as opposed to waking up to the fact of it. See, all you have to do is wake up to the fact of it, and you'll change your mind. If you think you need to think into it, you'll hold it in place. Just how people hold experiences in place for long periods of time is because they think into them, think about them. So, like, for example, I could, if I wanted to, which I wouldn't do, which I am tempted to do at times, feel sorry for myself. Poor me. I can't live the life I used to live, which I really liked. I traveled all the time. And I could leave whenever I wanted. I can't now. I'm not traveling. I'm not leaving. Poor me. I don't get to do what I want to do. Now, see, I could see the thinking.
I think that's quite a prevalent feeling for many people in these times, Linda.
Yeah,
Without
especially
getting
COVID.
into too much, yeah, I didn't want to get into too much details, but I see that a lot in society. Like, people feel
Right.
a
No,
lot
I
of that right now.
take COVID out of it.
Yeah.
This was before COVID, because this has been going on for 2.5 years. Okay, before COVID. Okay. So, but my point is the thinking, having the first thought of and feeling sorry for myself. Now, if I didn't know what I knew, I could just think into that and build that experience of feeling sorry, and think it's important and real and necessary and good. And then it would become very strong and very powerful in me by continuing to build that experience of thought and feeling. But because I don't want to stay there. I'll have that thought, I'll have that feeling, and then I'll go, wait a minute. I don't want to build that reality. I don't want to do it. And then I wake up and it's gone. It's that simple. It's that simple.
If you didn't know about thought creating our reality, and you were to think into that, and you were to feel it and think, and those feelings will feel real, and you thought into them, your whole mood would drop. And then when your mood dropped, that wouldn't just affect that thought about holidays, it would then affect your whole life, because your general mood would drop.
And then you know what would happen? I'd build resentment. That would be the next.
Yeah.
Right. Feeling sorry for myself because I can't do what I want to do. Then I could resent George. And I could think about how I resented him. And that would be terrible. That would be a terrible personal reality to build. Horrible personal. That would be a horrible reality to live in.
And I can imagine you might feel stuck. If you didn't know the role thought was playing, you might feel stuck in that reality that there was no other option.
Right. I feel, because the more real I'd make it, the more stuck. Yeah. That's right.
So understanding thought really, really sets you free.
It does.
Really sets you free. There's another question I really wanted to ask.
I really want to get to this question.
Yeah,
I've just been waiting for you to. So there was two people that made this point, and I'm going to kind of read the comments of both of them, and then we'll kind of answer it together. I am wondering what you might say about how best to deal with things when you are trying your best to be optimistic and to see the essence of your child, as you mentioned last week, but when your spouse is finding it hard to see anything but limitation and what has been lost. How do you deal with their low mood and discouragement surrounding it all when you are trying to be positive? When they say it's a progressive condition and only going to get worse, and that there is no way to be happy because the situation is bleak. My loved one who is sick has a bad day and my own mood plummets, and I have strong feelings of worry, sadness, or depression. So I felt kind of putting those two together because kind of talking as spouses, it reminds me of my own experience actually, and when we were speaking about it, I told Claire. So when my daughter was born, and she kind of, as I said, she went through this injury. So when I, as we've said, tonight, when I realised that it was coming from inside of me, I found a great deal of relief in that. As Linda was saying, when you kind of see that it's coming from how you're thinking about it, so the feeling changed. And I have to say, I didn't see the grander picture. This was before I came across this kind of this general psychological approach, but I could see that it was helpful for me. But the experience for my wife was something very different, and she doesn't mind me sharing this, but she was very bleak and upset because she was in a very similar feeling to what I was before I could see that it was coming from myself, from inside of me, as it were. And that went on for several years. And so, like as these questions were pointing to, she was very low and very bleak, and very she struggled with the situation because all she could see was a bad prognosis and a future that was very limiting and very difficult and just going to be very challenging for the rest of our lives, and that we were going to have to live with something that we didn't want. Now, I didn't know anything other at this point, anything other than just I could see that there was a way out of my feeling like that, and so surely there was for her, because I wasn't a genius, and I'd just seen something that was helpful for me, and all I kind of could see to try and help her was from that place of just being understanding of her situation, being loving to her and kind to her, given the amount of suffering that she was going through, and doing my best to point to the experience that I was having and how I could see that it was coming from me. And there were many ups and downs along that journey, because, as I said, it was over several years. But and so, you know, there were times that was obviously very upsetting and distressing, and, you know, she thought I was mad, probably. But eventually, you know, she found the same peaceful place that that I was living in, and could see what I was kind of getting on about, and came to see the same things for herself. Anyway, so that was my experience, and yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, just one thing I want to add to that. So essentially, you know, if you can see that the person you love who's suffering is just caught up in some painful thinking, and that it can pass, it can change, then being loving and kind is the best. I mean, that this relates to all situations in life. If my husband or my daughter are having a hard time, I'm kind and loving to them, because I know it will pass. I know it will pass. You know, our experience is not fixed, even though it feels that way. So I love what you said, Julian. And I love the fact that Jo also, you know, her thinking changed. She had new, fresh thinking about it, and her experience changed. And that's available to all of us at any time.
I was going to say, that's ultimately why we're here, because we're pointing in the same way and talking about our own experience. This isn't some theoretical, you know, kind of, you know, thing that we're kind of pointing to. We've all seen this for ourselves, and we're kind of doing our best to point to it so that you can see it too.
My experience was different. Do we still have time?
We're kind of out of time, but it's okay. If people, you know, want to leave, then they can leave.
My experience was different, because George really never had much of a mood, or would go down. Prior to his stroke, he really didn't. He was so consistently upbeat, but after a stroke, he would go down. He would get very dark at times, and I would react to it, and I get upset and worried and concerned when he would go down. And I had to learn not to react. I had to learn not to react to it. So I'd find myself like starting to feel a certain way, like frightened or concerned or anxious, or some version of upset or reactivity. And I just learned not to go there. Now, I do at times. There are times when I don't catch myself, and I you know, I get up, I go down with him. But I've learned, I'm getting better. I'm on a learning curve. So it's getting better and better for me.
I'm pleased you said the I could have said some of that as well. Like, it was, I don't want to paint too rosy a picture, you know, kind of those, you know, like I said, like a few years, like my, yeah, like I said, it was ups and downs for us as well. And I also, you know, I felt that in that question as well. Like, I had, you know, like you said, you had to learn how to not get into that feeling as well. And so there were times, obviously, where it, you know, you get sucked into that, and you do your best to kind of find your way out of it.
But see, to me, having a learning curve is very hopeful. Very hopeful. It makes me, it settles me down. It's like, okay, so I got caught up this time. I'm a whole lot better than I used to be.
For me, it really helped not taking it personally, not taking other people's emotional states personally. I used to do that. I used to kind of jump in there and think that that was helpful. But when I learned that an emotional state is transitory and that everything, that there's possibility for a different place, then I stopped taking other people's ups and downs so personally. And then I started getting curious.
Claire, before we go, would you summarize tonight, and then I'll close it for kind of what we're going to talk about next week. I put you on the spot a little bit, so I'll just fill for a few seconds while you think about that.
No, that's fine.
Well, do you want?
Yeah, you go, Linda, if you want to.
Well, what we talked about is we started with hope and how that was possible for people, and how it really had to do with really observing or reflecting and seeing how a person's mind can change, their state of mind can change, and that you're not stuck with the experience that you have in the moment. It can change, and it's a consequence of thought and feeling. And it's like Claire said, it's really, if you think about it, if you watch yourself, your thoughts and feelings are constantly in transition. We don't think they are, but they are. If you actually look, your thought and feeling is in transition. And so if your thought and feeling is in transition, everything's kind of up for grabs. Anything's possible. And so we talked about the role of thought and consciousness in state of mind. And then we talked about guilt as another, transient state of mind that you can look at and use, or not, in to check your, whether you're following your moral or ethical code. And then Claire talked about it in terms of how it really guilt can keep you in the past. And then we talked about how everybody it sees things differently. Like I see guilt different than she sees guilt, and we're guilty about different things. And like I'm guilty about leaving, and one of the people in the audience is guilty about actually going off and doing without her husband. I'm not guilty about that. I'm guilty about leaving. So it's interesting how we all think differently, and we judge ourselves for that experience. And so really what this was about is a possibility of having new thought, the possibility of understanding something deeper about how we function as human beings, and waking up to our experiences such that we can shake them off. How's that?
Beautifully done.
It's perfect. And to kind of tie it up, next week we have the one that I'm kind of looking forward to is titled "Is it realistic to live with lightheartedness in the face of disability or diagnosis?" Now that might sound challenging.
And I would say it's not only realistic, it's important. Yeah.
So please join us next week. You can catch the recording on the website, or if you're watching us on the website, the session is next Thursday, the 24th, correct? Yeah,
that's right.
So next 20.
I'm going to be there or be square.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.